You'd be surprised how many Marvel characters have their roots in horror. In his initial appearance, Groot was an alien invader from Planet X, set on bottling up a small town for experimentation. And now in the MCU, the same character is essentially the Baby Yoda of the Marvel Universe.
I'm Groot.
Yeah, I know, you came first. That little green stole your thunder, didn't he?
I'm Groot.
Back in the day, Marvel was so much more than just superheroes. You had romance comics, horror, sci-fi, even westerns. So given that so many Marvel characters have their roots in horror or other genres, maybe it's not a surprise that recent books are beginning to go back and draw from that well of inspiration again. 2 books from Marvel have completely renewed my interest in the 616 and what the Marvel Universe has to offer. Al Ewing's Immortal Hulk and Donnie Cates Venom. Both runs have redefined their characters, leaving them with greater depth and deeper characterization than ever before. With each of their new stories serving as road trips through the characters' histories and the lore behind them, with each book bringing new perspective to various moments throughout the characters' comic book history. Choosing not to disrespect or retcon the past, but to build upon it instead and kind of turn some of those moments on their head. Choosing to recontextualize past moments instead of erasing them in favor of something new. These stories kind of subvert the past of these characters in a way that ties otherwise unrelated stories together and paints a greater picture of these characters' roles in Marvel cosmology. In both runs, you see Elder Gods awaken from the shadows, with the revelation that Hulk and Venom might have something more to do with that than they're initially aware of. All the while, previously dead enemies and allies begin to resurrect themselves, revealing that both the symbiotes and gamma-irradiated Hulk monsters have deeper, more cosmic roots than we were ever aware of. Hulk and Venom both develop monstrous new abilities to combat the eldritch horrors of their new stories. The new powers they develop are shown off in an amazing way on page, with Joe Benet utilizing this beautiful Junji Ito type body horror for all the gamma-infected characters, and Ryan Stegman's Venom utilizing aesthetics that look like they walk straight out of heavy metal. All this stands in stark contrast to how you would normally see the characters interpreted in an American comic. So get your Sonics ready, folks. Because this is gonna be a smash.
Surf the web.
Shut up, Brock. We don't have time.
So what happened to Marvel Horror? To put it simply, the Comics Code Authority happened. There's an infamous example of Sauron, who was intended to be a vampire with an appearance more similar to Man-Bat, but because the CCA banned vampires, they couldn't do it and had to make him a pterodactyl person instead. For years, the CCA guideline has limited what writers could or couldn't do with books, particularly in regards to the genre of horror. Because of the new guidelines, horror became less popular and less profitable, with newer characters like Blade and Ghost Rider still drawing from that long history of Marvel horror, but having a more noticeably superheroic edge in their modern iterations. But now it's the 2020s. The most popular comics of the day tend to borrow from other genres, like Vision, which has kind of a Gone Girl vibe and borrows from true crime type stories and has that kind of horror at home type vibe, with the way the story presents itself as the story of a family slowly but surely breaking apart one by one. The book has more in common with Hereditary than it does 2012's Avengers. That horror at home vibe does so much to differentiate Vision from every other comic coming out in the comic industry. There's no evil robot or ancient demon to defeat. The evils and supervillains of this story are broader concepts like racism, deception, ignorance, and even Vision's loveless, failing marriage. The villain of the Vision is the fact that you can do everything right and do everything in your power to be a good person and do the right thing. And you can still fail and find your world falling down around you through no fault of your own. The world is cruel, and that's true horror. You okay, bro? Even though Immortal Hulk and Venom find the characters fighting literal eldritch gods in a more traditional superhero manner than a book like Vision might, they still take time to explore those real-world tragedies that could occur to anyone. Like conflicts with your loved ones, struggles with self-loathing, death, physical abuse, or even gaslighting. And maybe this is a good time to mention, light spoiler warning for Venom and Hulk. I'm not going to be delving into anything too major, but if you want to go in fresh, well, this is your warning. The Donny Cates run of Venom finds Eddie confronting the fact that his symbiote has been altering his memories for years. In the same way the symbiote can heal a wound in Eddie's body or get rid of cancer cells, it was also rewriting the traumatic experiences in his memories so that they wouldn't trigger his PTSD. Gaslighting Eddie to the point that he remembered his sister who never existed in the first place. Or even erasing the core memory where Eddie killed a kid in a drunk driving accident by making Eddie think he was the teenager who got hit by the drunk driver instead of the drunk driver who hit the kid. And on top of all that, the symbiote took his DNA and and impregnated his former wife with it, all without Eddie ever knowing. And now that child is being raised by Eddie's own abusive father. All this results in Eddie waking up into a nightmare scenario that had been kept hidden from him by his other for years. Now, in the past, the Venom symbiote has been used as a metaphor for drug abuse, and while they touch on that a little bit here in the beginning, I'm not so sure that metaphor angle holds weight for this run specifically. Instead, I think the way that Eddie's relationship with his symbiote parallels his relationship with his family could be the metaphor that they're going for instead. These are abusive and unhealthy relationships, and neither Eddie nor his symbiote know how to break those cycles of abuse because toxic relationships are all they've ever known. So from the symbiote gaslighting Eddie to Eddie taking quiet pills to shut out the symbiote's voice, it's pretty apparent that Eddie and his symbiote are in an abusive relationship at the beginning of the run. Both of them are guilty of their own sins against the other. But Donny Cates also explores the roots of that relationship by exploring their relationships with their families. The symbiote was removed from its hive, and Eddie was kicked out and disowned by his own father. Neither of them understand how to function or have healthy relationships because of it, and it affects the relationships they have with everyone else they encounter, leading the symbiote to gaslight Eddie by altering his memories, with the symbiote afraid that Eddie would leave him if he knew the truth or experienced the full scope of his own trauma. In a twisted sense, the symbiote thinks that it's helping Eddie by hiding that trauma from him, but the symbiote hasn't gotten rid of it at all. It's just buried it down deeper, making it that much harder for Eddie to deal with that trauma and come to terms with it. Toxic relationships and generational abuse are recurring elements in this story, but just like the run sees Eddie becoming the father that he never had, the symbiote's been a daddy for a pretty good while as well. Now, Venom's spawn is Carnage, a symbiote that never knew the cosmic origins of his species because it was born on Earth, and instead it only ever knew the killer instincts and twisted mind of its first host, Cletus Cassidy. The relationship between the two symbiotes is just as toxic and combative as Eddie's relationship with his own father. And one of the things I really like about this run of Venom is how Eddie gets the opportunity to break those cycles of parental abuse by raising his son Dylan in a different way, showing him compassion and kindness and empathy rather than anger and violence and vitriol. The relationship that Eddie forms with his son doesn't just affect him, but it affects the symbiote too, with the symbiote and Eddie bonding and finding mutual ground and healing their broken bonds over the course of the run because of it, breaking that cycle of generational abuse that's shared between them, both literally and metaphorically. And going back to the core of father-son relationships, the symbiotes as a species have their own struggles with an abusive parental figure. The symbiotes harbor a dark secret origin, having been forged by an eldritch god of darkness as soldiers to do his bidding. This leads to more and more revelation about the nature of symbiotes, their hive mind, and how they created their home planet as a cage for their destructive master. The symbiotes do all this in order to go out into the galaxy and form their own sense of sentience and identity, rather than being enslaved to the whims of their creator for all eternity. The struggles of finding your own identity and dealing with an abusive parental figure are mirrored in Eddie and the symbiote's struggles with identity and how the world perceives them.
But how does one tell the difference?
Well, it's super simple. I mean, you just have to, you can intuit it, you can sense it, sometimes you can even feel it.
Whatever you say. But can we get something to eat now?
But on the other side of the coin, Bruce finds himself dealing with some daddy issues of his own. Bruce was purposefully killed one last time in order to put the Hulk down forever, but instead the Hulk just came back angrier. Now, instead of pure rage being the catalyst that transforms the Hulk, Banner and the Hulk find themselves sharing their body on a time schedule, with Banner taking over during the day and Hulk taking control at the night. Only it's not the Savage Hulk that we're familiar with that's taking the charge, it's the Devil Hulk, an alter that's been locked down inside of Bruce's subconscious for years, all because Bruce and the other Hulks are afraid of its destructive and benevolent behavior. But Immortal Hulk reveals that there may be more to this Hulk than initially revealed, with the revelation that the Devil Hulk has been inside of Bruce for longer than any of the others, serving as a sort of imaginary friend to help him deal with the trauma of his abusive childhood. Bruce's father was a physicist who believed that his work with Gamma had altered his own DNA. One night while staying late at the lab, he saw a green door, and the next night when he came home, his wife announced that she was pregnant. Brian thought that Bruce was an unnatural freak accident that came about as a result of his own Gamma experiments. But beyond that, he was also deeply jealous of his wife's love for their own son, and eventually that jealousy drove Brian to kill her, resulting in Brian being put in an insane asylum and eventually being killed at the hands of his own son. But all throughout these struggles, the Devil Hulk was deep down inside of Bruce. Even before the accident that transformed Banner into the Hulk, the Devil Hulk was there, helping him make sense of everything. But now in the present time, the once dead Brian Banner has returned, manifesting through various Gamma monsters after uniting with the Gamma God of Hell, the One Below All. The one below all wants to bring about some kind of apocalypse and wants to use the Hulk to do it. It's here that we learn that every time Bruce transforms into the Hulk, he's actually dying, and when he dies, he wakes up in Gamma Hell. But whenever he comes back to life, he forgets everything that happened on the other side. This leads to the revelation that all the individual Hulk personas are actually demons from Gamma Hell, and they share the body of their hosts via possession. When the Hulk persona takes over, they swap places with the demon on the other side of the green door, but then they forget about it afterwards. I might have that a little bit wrong, but that's at least how I interpreted it. The series leaves some of the specifics kind of vague, but that's my core understanding of it all. So the Devil Hulk comes back in order to help Bruce deal with his father and the One Below All, but the Devil Hulk also has some plans of his own, including but not limited to ending global warming, putting a stop to unethical consumption, reorganizing the structure of the world into a system that's more sustainable long term and improves the quality of life for everyone involved, and smashing capitalism. Pretty good stuff if you ask me, but the rest of the world ain't so sold on it.
Because I don't think the Hulk I knew is around these days.
The Green Scar. He and the Professor are dormant right now. I'm not sure why.
Uh-huh. The two most heroic Hulks aren't up for this, but you're not sure why? Come on, dude. Look, I know about anger. You know I've struggled with that. Look, I know what it's like to want to save the world.
I don't. The world can't be saved, Amadeus. Not the human world. Not the world as we currently understand it. Earth's climate is changing rapidly. The world's human built is not sustainable. But there's still short-term profit to be made. So the same systems are allowed to continue over all our dead bodies if need be.
Bruce, look. The math of this is bad. I'm not saying it's not. But there's still hope. We still live in a world of heroes.
I don't believe that anymore.
Among the various ideas that Immortal Hulk goes over in relation to systemic change, one of my favorites is the exploration of media manipulation. And they do that through a character named Xemnu. Xemnu can brainwash the minds of others into thinking that he's the ultimate hero. Meanwhile, Xemnu is intent on enslaving the human race for his own desires. It's through Xemnu that the comic explores how people view the past through rose-tinted glasses. They do that by integrating modern sci-fi concepts like the Mandela effect into the story. Relating Xemnu's brainwashing powers to the Mandela effect was a really interesting plot device for the story. I actually ended up reading through this guy's entire comic history after I read the story, and he ended up becoming one of my favorite obscure characters as a result. I'm gonna go light on covering him for now, so just know that you might see a video about Xemnu pop into your feed sooner than later. But it's through Xemnu and the Minotaur that Ewing expresses grief with the current state of things. And it's that exploration of real-world struggles through the avatar of a fictional setting that really makes me love the book so much.
Look at this bull man. Look at the bull man. He's the CEO of a company that's trying to stop the Hulk from reversing climate change. He's a bull, like the symbol of Wall Street. Get it? He's a bull. This monster is the mass media, recuperating the Hulk's radical message. He consumes things and reforms them to be like him, hollow and soulless. This is a real comic that is being published right now. I can't believe they were allowed to make this.
But beyond smashing capitalism, a lot like the Cates run of Venom, Ewing's run also focuses on family and breaking cycles of abuse. But it's also kind of a road trip through Hulk's comic book history. I'll admit, I hadn't read many Hulk stories before I got into the book. Honestly, I hadn't really read any. I had watched the cartoon and movies as a kid, and I read some Avengers comics when I got older, but that was about it really. But getting into the lore of the character was way easier than I could have ever imagined, especially given how the book basically gives you whatever context you need through flashbacks. Like there's this one issue with the leader where they go over every individual time that the character died, and then they use those past stories to build a wider narrative in the background that connects them to the new story. And they do something kind of similar with Betty, where they go through her personal history with Bruce during an issue that's centered on her. I ended up doing a deep dive into Hulk lore by watching the cartoon and looking into some of the references. And now afterwards, I feel like I'm a lot more familiar with Hulk and his cast of characters as well as his comic book history. Enough to the point that I would say he's one of my favorite Marvel characters now. And I completely get why people say that the movies just don't do the character justice. It even convinced me to go back and read through some of the old storylines just for the fun of it. What I'm saying is that you really don't have to be a Hulk fan or even a comic fan at all to get into the story, because the book just does a great job introducing you to all the characters and concepts that you need to know. But beyond that, the book also has a big focus on the Hulk family, resurrecting characters like Samson and Betty, as well as introducing new characters like Jackie, Dr. McGowan, or General Fortain. The book explores Hulk's personas, their relationships with each other, and their relationships with the rest of the cast of characters. There are a lot of characters here that I knew next to nothing about, but by the end of the run they ended up being some of my all-time favorites. Characters like Puck, Xemnu, Doc Samson, and even new characters like Jackie and Dr. McGowan. I've always been a big fan of the family concept in superhero books. You have the Ant-Man family, the Bat family, Super family, the Flash family, and even to a certain extent comics like X-Men and Teen Titans function on that level. They all make for super interesting character dynamics in those stories. So to see Hulk take that same approach for his own book was fantastic. And they really play up and into that on the Gamma Flight side of things. Absorbing Man and Titania have this relationship that's so integral to the team and kind of serves as a foundation that the rest of the characters build upon. You really get the vibe that Gamma Flight slowly but surely becomes a family. The Gamma Flight side of things was so well put together that it ended up spinning off into a book of its own. From the book's messaging to its lovable cast of characters, the trippy sci-fi body horror artwork, there's just so much to love about the Immortal Hulk. It's one of my favorite comics and it's one of my comfort comics. I'm absolutely positive this is a book that I'm going to be reading and rereading and rereading over and over and over again for the rest of my life. I am just in love with it. It is so good. But enough about that. So why did I make one Hulk and Venom video instead of making two separate videos? Well, here's why. Going back to my initial thesis about horror making a resurgence in Marvel Comics, both runs see the characters taking on elder gods that are related to the source of their power. There's a lot of commonality between the main villains of these stories. They're each gods of the element that give Hulk and Venom the powers that make them the heroes they are. But another commonality between the stories are Hulk and Venom's struggles with childhood trauma, abusive fathers, and the concepts of resurrection playing into the story in a more than significant way. Both runs deal with the ideas of breaking cycles of abuse, be it familial abuse or capitalistic abuse of resources. The fact that they both have to take down the patriarch gods of their respective elements only serves to double down on the themes of breaking your chains, killing your masters, and becoming the owner of your own destiny, as well as securing a future for your loved ones and those around you, as well as those that go through the same struggles that you do. The god of symbiotes, Null, was trapped inside the planet of the symbiotes until Carnage tried to steal his power, and then Eddie had to free him in order to stop Carnage. And similarly, the one below all seems to be trapped in Gamma Hell and wants to bring the destruction from down below into our realm above. And it seems like he's possessing Gamma-infected characters to do it. All the while, the Hulk's rival, Leader, is trying to steal power from the one below all, just like Carnage had been trying to take power from Null. You have two larger-than-life concepts, the god of Gamma and the god of symbiotes. And on the other end of it, you have two scrappy anti-heroes that are in over their heads, taking on both those elder gods and their arch-rivals on top of that. Hulk and Venom both go from the lowest points in their lives to soon after ascending to literal godhood in order to meet their maker face to face. These are the stories of two men who defied what held them back, overcame their trauma, broke cycles of generational abuse, killed elder gods, and became gods of their own element. Literal zeros to heroes. From the most hated and controversial figures in the Marvel Universe to becoming literal gods and amongst the most respected of their peers. But why do I think it's important to compare and contrast the two books like that? Well, Immortal Hulk is going to end a few weeks before this video goes live, and Venom ended earlier this year. And the writers from both stories are actually trading characters. So Hulk's writer, Ewing, is going to take on Venom, and Venom's writer, Donny Cates, is going to take on Hulk. I really think there could be a crossover event between the two. When Carnage was fighting Venom Hulk, he saw the green door, and when he did, he said this. So, yeah, I really don't think these stories are completely wrapped up, and I definitely think there's going to be some kind of a crossover in the future, especially given how Carnage came back after the Extreme Carnage event. But for everything these stories have in common, there are also a lot of differences. The way these stories are told couldn't be more different, and I mean that format-wise. You can read Immortal Hulk from issue 1 to issue 50 and not miss a thing. There are spin-offs and tie-ins, but they're all one-shots, and while they're supplementary and they add to the story, you don't really need them to get the main story. They might help you understand what She-Hulk was up to during different parts of the story, but you wouldn't need them to understand the story. They're not necessary or required reading by any means. There are no big events, so you could read from issue 1 to 50 and get everything you need right then and there, without any extra reading or research. But the same thing just can't be said for Venom. You get less than 15 issues into Venom, and a fucking Thor event cuts right into the middle of it. The plot just grinds to a screeching halt for 3 whole issues, for 3 months, and goes nowhere. They don't even collect it in the trade. The main story of Eddie Brock is told throughout the Venom comic, but Carnage's resurrection and other crucial plot points for King in Black or Absolute Carnage are all told in side stories or spin-offs. You really have to look up a reading order to know when these comics take place, and it's really frustrating. And I say this as someone who's been into comics for more than a decade now. Stuff like Carnage's resurrection are never shown in the core books. There are just so many plot points that are essential to the story that you wouldn't know if you didn't read the side stories. And trying to switch from one book to the other can just get really frustrating. Like going from Venom 14 to Carnage Unleashed 1, or Venom 45 to King in Black 3, it's just so much more frustrating than it needs to be. I can't repeat that enough. It's not impossible to do, it's just frustrating to do. Donny Cates' run of Venom exhibits every annoying trope about the release format of comics, from unnecessary tie-ins to crossovers with events that are completely unrelated to the story. And it even goes as far as spawning events of its own, with those events featuring an obnoxious number of tie-ins of their own. Some relevant to the story, but most not, making it twice as confusing to figure out what to read and when. But Immortal Hulk exhibits none of that. There are a few spin-offs that give you context, like I said before, but nothing that you really need in order to understand the core story the way you do with Venom. Just something to be aware of before you get into either run. But don't let that confusion hold you back from reading Donny Cates Venom. Just maybe check a reading guide if you feel like you missed something somewhere, cause you probably did. I'm not good at writing conclusions, but I had a lot of fun making this video, just like I had a lot of fun reading these books. They seriously renewed my interest in Marvel Comics for the first time in years. I really hope you consider checking these books out. I know I dragged Cates Venom through the ringer for the release format, but it's still one of my favorite comic runs of all time, just like Immortal Hulk. I seriously can't recommend either book enough. Whether you've never read a Hulk or Venom book before, or you've read every Hulk and Venom book ever, there's seriously something for everyone. And when you do read the book, or if you already have, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the book in the comments below. Videos like these are spurred on out of conversations I have with other people about comics. So with that in mind, I'd love to hear what you thought about these books. And as always, if you liked the video, you know the YouTube things. Like and subscribe with the notification bell on for more Super Swim Team 7 in the future. And as always, I'd love to give a big thank you to my lovely supporters on Patreon. I feel like I don't mention this enough, but I've got a few Patreon tiers that I'm going to put on screen. If you're interested in joining, the link is in the description down below. So with all that being said, I've been Swim Team Captain 7 of Super Swim Team 7, signing off.